Star Wars' most elegant and thoughtful TV series to date, Andor, is absolute catnip for fans of politics and philosophy, and I have to point out what I think is the worst political analysis of Andor currently on the internet. And it all comes down to a character named Nemik and his manifesto, and two very important words. So let's begin. This all goes back to one key scene in Andor's first season, episode 5, where a young rebel named Nemik is working on a hyperspace navigator next to Cassian Andor for their next mission, and he vents at Cassian about the importance of being able to fix the device and calibrate it manually without any automation.
We've grown reliant on Imperial tech and we've made ourselves vulnerable.
Nemik is appalled at the slow and silent death of liberty and self-ownership that the Empire has overseen.
Nemik sees oppression everywhere.
And Nemik points out that the Empire commits violent atrocity after violent atrocity, but yet the loss of freedom is still confusing in how it happens. A simple, real-world example of this is the ubiquity of navigation apps. Think about how often you use maps on your mobile device to travel long distances or just navigate to work. Motivated by a desire to save time, avoid traffic, and never miss a turn, we give up a little piece of our own understanding of how cities are designed, the logic of the urban grid, and the names of highways that could take us wherever we need to go. We lose a little freedom. If Google and Apple turned off the lights or cellular networks went down overnight, would you still know how to get to a safe place or a family home hundreds of miles away? Be honest, you might struggle. I know I would, and that's our self-determination being limited. That is your freedom fading like a dying star. Nemik is also speaking to the technology's capture of the user who benefits from the tool but doesn't know how it actually works. All across the world, governments are negotiating right-to-repair laws that expand or limit your legal right to repair, tinker with, or make modifications to cars, farm equipment, cell phones, and much more. Commodification can be used as a tool of control between you and the supplier of the commodity. Self-reliance is foundational to Nemik's cause for rebellion. But what Nemik says next is the hinge on which everything else hangs, including his manifesto.
He's writing a manifesto. Did he tell you?
Which we'll get to momentarily. Here are the two words.
Our elemental rights are such a simple thing to hold, they will have to shake the galaxy awfully hard to loosen our grip.
Elemental rights. Carefully selected dialogue, and they change the context of everything else Nemik has to say in Andor. For something to be elemental, it is naturally occurring, foundational. It is like a chemical component of life itself. It's natural. Nemik is suggesting that creatures of the galaxy hold what we call today natural rights, an idea rooted in the philosophical tradition of the Enlightenment. You see, Nemik is a radical, a revolutionary, and fundamentally against the system that controls and commodifies the galaxy and its people. If you live in the Western world, you live in the stew of the Enlightenment, which broke over its knee the systems of absolute monarchy, mercantilism, and feudalism, all with one simple,
Pure idea.
we call it natural rights. To modern eyes, Enlightenment thinking is the establishment. It is now the system. And so Nemik, in his youth and zeal and idealism and manifesto writing, pretty much codes to people as Marxist communism. If you're still with me, you probably love philosophy and political science, and you're watching Geeky Stoics, a channel all about philosophy in plain sight, and few do this better than Star Wars. So be sure to join up with us for more on that. So anyways, Nemik presents as a sort of modern youth communist archetype, but it's completely wrong, and elemental rights is the reason. Karl Marx's worldview was rooted in historical materialism, and it dismissed abstract universal rights that exist independently of social and economic conditions, like the right to free speech. He saw such ideas as ideological constructs that often served to justify the interests of the ruling class, capitalists, and religious institutions. Natural rights require a source, and Enlightenment thinkers ascribed that source to God. We hold these truths to be self-evident
that all men are created equal, etc.
that they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Self-evident, then.
The old wheel of power was a system that privileged monarchs with a divine right coming from God, and the new wheel suggested an innate equality between all human beings. That shifts the burden of proof for the right to power back to the ruling class, so that they needed to have the support of the people that they actually ruled.
I am increasingly persuaded that the earth belongs exclusively to the living, and that one generation has no more right to bind another to its laws and judgments than one independent nation has the right to command another.
Democracy was once a very radical and dangerous idea. In Marx and Engels' Communist Manifesto, as well as the critique of the Gotha program, Marx makes clear that human liberation could only come through the transformation of society's economic systems, abolishing class distinctions and private ownership. Any suggestion that Nemik has a natural or elemental right to freedom, like owning his own spacecraft or a hyperspace navigator that belongs to him, doesn't really mesh well with Marx. At best, it aligns with democratic socialist principles, which leverage economic gains of private property and individual ownership to fund social welfare states, and those have a popular democratic mandate to support public goods. But that's not Marxism. Cassian is asked what he believes in.
I'd like to hear what Clem believes.
To which he responds,
I know what I'm against.
everything else will have to wait. And Nemik delivers another vital truth here about revolutionary movement.
You're my ideal reader.
The radical who writes to radicals is insignificant. The radical who can put their ideas in terms that fence-sitters and normies can identify with, those thinkers become legends, and their manifestos will be printed for generations. Manifesto is treated like a spooky word because of the Communist Manifesto and communism's stubborn persistence within academic circles. But a manifesto is simply a declaration of policy and a philosophical set of goals that are meant to persuade the reader. It's not inherently bad.
I've been reading Common Sense by Thomas Paine.
Common Sense by Thomas Paine is a manifesto, a short and snappy publication meant to argue in just a few essays why American colonists needed to wake up to their lack of common cause with Great Britain and rebel.
You want a revolution? I want a revelation. So listen to my declaration.
And he argued that it was a life or death situation, not a matter of political convenience.
It is one thing to turn the other cheek, but to lie down on the ground like a snake.
The Declaration of Independence, considered very vanilla in our modern context because it was victorious, was a manifesto, signed boldly by its contributors. It was a rallying cry for Enlightenment principles, and it was a death sentence for the people who signed it. It's part of why John Hancock signed so large on the Declaration. He was giving a big middle finger to King George and saying, if you're going to kill us, kill me first. And when Nemik's manifesto is passed on after death to Cassian Andor, we get one of the most beautiful scenes in all of Star Wars as it is being read.
Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction.
I mean, this is so beautiful because revolutionary movements that last cannot be astroturfed or faked. They have to reflect conditions on the ground and fit within human nature and how people actually behave in reality, not theory. My criticism of the suggestion that Nemik and Andor points to Marx and communism is that communism is based around making a new man. Bolshevism and Marxist-Leninism require intellectualism and rigid discipline, or a self-mastery that reject natural impulses in individual human beings in favor of higher ideals. Basically, you have to give up yourself and your wants and your needs for the communist state and utopia. If you believe human beings are what they are, and that freedom is a pure idea occurring spontaneously and without instruction, you won't land on Marx and Engels. Re-education, I will do better, and struggle sessions as hallmarks of Marxism are not very in keeping with the Rebel Alliance. Tyranny does require, though, constant effort. You have to deceive, adapt, control, and never stop moving the goalposts in order to make the masses feel free even when they are not. And you could say that that's Trotsky's permanent revolution, or Huxley's Brave New World, where citizens merely choose between mind-numbing drugs and different states of consciousness, but they can't choose to not participate at all. I haven't talked much about capitalism and markets because you can make make some valid arguments based on Nemik and Andor about how technology and finance are used to control the masses, and in classic Star Wars fashion, I think it's very muddy and open to interpretation. You may be wondering, though, I thought this was a Stoicism-focused channel, and you're partially right. Nemik and Andor, it sits right on the edge of so many political philosophies. Marxism, capitalism, liberalism, anarchism, all of these ways of arranging people and organizing rules that promise freedom to people. Even fascism is promising freedom from something, whether it's fear, uncertainty, globalism. Anarchism goes the road of having no government and social contract at all, but obviously fails to create systems that make people feel free. Are you more free on a rural highway with no official rules or speed limits where you could be robbed or run off the road without consequence? Or are you more free on a government road with speed limits and clearly drawn lines to protect everybody? I'd argue that you have more freedom and self-determination on the government road, with laws and penalties for bad behavior. And so the Stoic principle here becomes very important. I don't think there is a government or economic order that frees the human being. Utopia is not real, and social liberation theology is always stripped down to the bone by trade-offs. You can't exist in a world with other human beings in total freedom, except for between your ears. Stoicism as a philosophy is somewhat ironic because it's all about freedom and it flourishes within the time of the Roman Empire and goes mainstream with people who consider monarchy and slavery to be natural states of being. Epictetus, the Stoic, was a slave whose work inspired another Stoic, Marcus Aurelius, who was an emperor. Two completely different people in terms of social freedom, both professing that no one can control your mind and disposition. And by the way, the inspiration for this episode came in part from the Marcus Aurelius Book of Quotes, a new publication that you can pick up on Amazon or wherever books are sold that breaks down all of Marcus Aurelius's writings and meditations into categories and different topics that he tackles in that classic Stoic text. And freedom is at the core of all of it. Your freedom to choose how you respond to things that are beyond your control, such as governments. The only freedom and liberation to be found is within, which is why the Empire in Star Wars and real-world regimes care so much about policing language, words, history books, and thought crime. Empires rise and fall, and they always will. But there's an empire between your ears that is yours. And I think Nemik and his doctrine of elemental rights would agree with this. I want to know what you think. Please leave a comment and tell us what you think is the political orientation or the philosophy that backs up Nemik's Manifesto and the underpinnings of the Rebel Alliance in Star Wars. As everybody's watching the new season of Andor this week and in the months ahead, I think that this is really important because the ideologies that inspire rebellion, they depend on the circumstances. And oftentimes the things that we think are super countercultural or revolutionary ideas in the moment aren't really that revolutionary at all. Maybe in a previous generation, those were the tools of oppression. And it often is the case that we lose touch with the radicalism and the revolutionary nature of old ideas, such as the Enlightenment